Good evening, and welcome to Up Close with Andrew West. Tonight, we'll be studying the Johnstown dam failure in Pennsylvania in 1889. This is part 2 of our series on this dam failure. On our last episode, the dam was on the verge of failure. The dam had been in disrepair for years and was on the property owned by the South Fork Hunting and Fishing Club, a hunting club for the super rich and super elite. Families with names such as Vandenberg, Mellon, and Carnegie all had cottages at this hunting and fishing club. The property had been purchased by a man named Benjamin Roth. The dam was reconstructed with a gang of railroad crew and had no engineer on site. The dam had had its spillways removed and its drainage pipes blocked so that the expensive fish at the hunting and fishing lodge would not escape. With these features of the dam removed, it was only a question of time before the failure occurred. A dam without a spillway is an accident waiting to happen. On Memorial Day weekend of 1889, a severe storm moved in over Johnstown. After a night of rain, the town of Johnstown was submerged in water and the dam was being overtopped. With the spillway removed and the discharge pipes not there was no way to lower the water level. By 3 in the afternoon, the dam was literally being ripped apart. People who were there and witnessed the failure said the dam literally just floated away. This sent a tremendous wall of water down the Conemaugh River and into Johnstown. The waves slammed into the Cambria ironworks and picked up tons of debris. This included several locomotives, barbed wire, and fuel for the engines. The wave tore through Johnstown, picking up victims along the way, and they were entangled in the barbed wire and the locomotives. The wave and debris were stopped at the end of town by a stone bridge. The debris and water piled up there. The fuel from the locomotives was ignited by lanterns which tipped over, and the entire mast caught on fire. Many of the victims were unable to free themselves and were burned alive. So, Mr. Burkett, could you tell us a little bit about what life was like in Johnstown and what the area was like back in the 1800s?
Well, Johnstown was a sort of backwoods trading center when it was founded in 1800. Boomed when the Pennsylvania Canal came through in the 1830s, and then 20 years later when the Pennsylvania Railroad came through. And it's a matter of decades. It had gone, from kind of a frontier outpost to one of the leading steel centers in the world.
By 1834, you had this wonderfully ambitious system that went basically from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia by a combination of narrow gauge railroad and traditional canals.
From what I understand, the rivers played a critical part in this story. Could you explain a little bit about that?
There are 3 major rivers around the Johnstown area. You have the Little Conemaugh River, and you have the Stony Creek River. And these 2 rivers merge to form the Conemaugh River itself. These rivers have provided what was necessary for the industries that were here, and these rivers helped put the town on the map.
As industry grew, so did the town. Approximately 30,000 people resided in the area in 1889.
From what I understand, the dam was not particularly well constructed.
They would just make a layer of earth, dirt and rock, Water would be added to make it airtight and watertight.
The center of the embankment consisted of slate, stones, and more earth. The downstream portion was built up mostly of rocks, weighing up to 10 tons.
From what I understand, the spillway section of a dam is the most important part of the structure. Just how safe and how well built were the spillways on the Johnstown Dam?
It had, we believe, certainly one spillway, but we think it had a second emergency spillway. It had pipes running underneath it, a culvert that allowed the operator of the dam to actually drain it if there was an emergency.
Taking 14 years to complete, the dam stood 72 feet high, 918 feet across, 10 feet thick at the top, and 220 feet thick at its base. It seemed impenetrable.
Did the canals play an important role in the Johnstown flood?
One of the many ironies in the timeline of the Johnstown flood story was that the western reservoir of the Pennsylvania Mainline Canal was finished just in time for canals to go out of business.
The railroads had taken over as the preferred source of transportation. With no need for a reservoir, the dam stood in neglect for the next 27 years.
So the dam was actually abandoned for quite a few years and was sitting there in a state of disrepair.
In 1862, a heavy storm caused a collapse in the center portion of the dam, which destroyed the stone culvert. The marred structure sat until 1879.
How did the dam being abandoned affect its structural integrity?
The South Fork Dam was really an accident waiting to happen. When it was reconstructed, there were several very serious engineering flaws, which really totally set the stage for disaster.
What role did Roth play in the reconstruction of the dam, and how did his failure to have the dam upgraded play an important part also in this dam disaster?
Benjamin Ruff bought the land and created the exclusive South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club.
Ruff, who had worked for the railroad, hired some workmen and came up here and began to rebuild the dam. They had no engineer working on the project, and it was really just a construction gang, a railroad construction gang.
Built like a railroad embankment, the dam was eventually repaired. But puddled clay was not used, and the culvert was not reinstalled. Along with no discharge system, one of the most damaging changes was the placement of mesh screens at the spillway, which prevented fish that had been imported for the club from escaping. The dam stood for close to another decade, until 1889.
The great storm of 1889 arrived. By the time people got up the next morning, on the morning of Friday, May 31st, many of the people in Johnstown saw that the streets in front of their homes were underwater. And it wasn't long before many of the streets in Johnstown actually resembled canals more than streets.
The rivers surrounding Johnstown were overflowing. Conemaugh Lake was taking on massive amounts of water in a very short period of time.
Conemaugh Lake would grow an estimated 30 to 33% larger than its normal size. Water was being dumped into the lake from the hills around it, as well as a lot of junk coming into the lake.
Frantic efforts to stop water from flowing over the top of the dam were futile. The spillway's mesh screens were so choked with debris, they couldn't be removed.
Water was rising about a foot an hour behind the dam. It was just a matter of time until water started over the top.
Many railway travelers and residents of the towns that lined the Little Conemaugh River took to the hills. Those that didn't paid with their lives.
They stood watching till about 10 minutes after 3 when the eroded dam just pushed away and 20 million tons of water just leapt out of the reservoir and began a 14-mile descent on Johnstown.
The flood wave ripped through the valley, decimating everything in its path.
So what you almost had was a ball of water rolling down this narrow sluice-like valley, and it pushed ahead of it everything, trees, houses, boulders. It pushed 80-ton locomotives as far as a mile, snapped off 3-foot diameter hardwood trees.
Reportedly reaching heights of up to 50 feet, the wall hit downtown, severing buildings from their foundations.
And as the flood came into town, it broke into 3 directions, and you had 3 tidal waves come crashing into Johnstown.
Residents were floating on their rooftops, hoping for an escape. It took only 10 minutes for the town to be wiped out. The once bustling Johnstown, proudly built on the backs of hard labor, was annihilated. An estimated 30 acres of debris, as deep as 40 feet, accumulated at the stone railroad bridge on the edge of town. The wreckage contained coal, kerosene, and lime, which soon ignited and became a raging inferno.
The fire burned for 3.5 days, and as many as 80 people who survived the flood died in the funeral pyre at the stone bridge.
The death toll from the Johnstown flood is recorded as 2,209.
It was estimated about 20,000 were in areas that were actually hit by the flood. And so about 1 in 10 perished.
But the town itself did not perish.
The Johnstown flood started the first major civilian relief effort in American history. It's one of the most inspirational stories in American history.
A new organization called the American Red Cross, led by founder Clara Barton, was on the scene in 5 days. During the next 5 months, the Red Cross began its journey towards the organization we know today.